why don't we just get things started really quick right away and have you guys introduce yourself? Um, Starting with why not BattleJew? Give a little bit of introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your arguments are going to be tonight.
I'm BattleJew. I'm notorious. And my argument is going to be error theory. I
Short,
really don't
sweet,
have
and
anything else. Yeah, I don't have anything else.
say short, sweet, and to the point. Okay. Um, then we'll pass it over to TJump. Good evening and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm TJump. I run a YouTube channel where I usually debate professors and philosophers on reasons to believe in God and other philosophy topics. My view is moral realism.
Okay. Um, Pretty simple. Basically, whoever wants to go first
We
wants
are
to start things.
exciting, aren't we?
Exactly.
Hey, we like to get straight into it.
TJump is the celebrity here, so I think it would be right to let him go first.
Okay, floor is all yours.
Sure. So, I'm a moral realist. I think that morality is objective. We have this phenomenon of moral intuition, moral progress we see when we experience certain kinds of phenomenon, and they seem to be morally relevant. Like killing babies seems to be wrong, and killing people for fun seems to be wrong. So, based on those, we can ask the question, well, what causes these phenomena? And maybe they're subjective, completely just made up by humans, or maybe they're objective and there's some fundamental aspect of reality that they correspond to. Like any other scientific phenomenon, we want to know, does this thing exist or is it an illusion? And so we can make different hypotheses and say, if it's real, if it is a real phenomenon, then we can make predictions to say, well, if my understanding of this phenomenon is correct, then we can expect that we will see this thing in the future. And if we test and find out that is correct, that is a great reason to think that morality would be objective. I have predictions for my model, we haven't confirmed yet, so I can't use that as evidence. But the reason that people should be moral realists today is because it's pretty obvious that drowning babies for fun is wrong. I mean, that's pretty much the basis. If you want to reject moral realism, then you can't make the statement drowning babies for fun is wrong. And the moral obviousness of that seems to be pretty relevant. And the question is, well, what makes it objectively moral? And I think morality is a higher order emergent property like fitness. So fitness is a property of animals that they can survive in different environments. That is an objective feature of the world that is independent of minds, and so it's definitely objective. And I think morality is the exact same thing. It's a higher order emergent property describing how agents can interact in an environment, and so it's definitely possible for it to be an objective feature, higher order emergent property. No, I don't see any problem with that. Obviously, we haven't proven it yet, but that seems like pretty good evidence for now, and I'll conclude there.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll pass it back over to BattleJew for first side of the argument, opening statement.
Well, I mean, I think that the idea that there would be something discoverable in the universe, moral fact, is really like a weird idea. Like I can accept that there are things in the universe seem to us to be that they will this way, even if
you're kind of breaking up
where they don't. I'm sorry, am I breaking up?
a little bit. You cut out twice, I think.
I do apologize. I'll restate what I said. I think that the idea that there would be something discoverable in the universe about morality is just a very, very strange thing. I accept that there are discoverable facts, gravity, thermodynamics, physics, relativity. I accept that these things are discoverable and that we describe them and assign them terminology and things like that. But the idea that we could discover something moral, something that is like an action guiding principle that would be external to ourselves, is really fairly strange to me. Without the existence of, say, something like a god. And since we have no good reason to believe in the existence of God, I don't think we have any good reason, or even any just reason to believe that there is something discoverable in the universe that is external to minds, that would be action guiding for us. Because that's, to me, what I take morals to be, is some kind of principle that is going to be action guiding. And I don't know where they would emerge from. If like a higher order emergent property of what? Of the universe? Something physical about the universe that tells us how we ought act in a given situation. That seems incredibly strange to me too.
All right, so a few things there. One is the idea that morality is action guiding isn't actually required in models of objective morality. That's a common misconception given by most theists. The second thing is, if there's a God and that would actually count as a basis of objective morality, well, then necessarily it's possible to have a basis of objective morality without a God. Anything the supernatural can explain, the unknown natural can also explain. So if a God actually works as an action guiding or moral basis, then a non-God could work. You just take the God properties, remove the consciousness, and you're left with the exact same morality. Kind of what the point of the Euthyphro dilemma was. And God basis doesn't work anyway, but that's a different topic. So I don't see how you saying it's weird is really an argument against it. It's really just you saying it's weird. Like, I could say it's weird that space-time bends. That doesn't affect space-time at all. So the major point is that if there was a moral feature of the world, why would it be any different than any other feature? Like, I think morality is descriptive, like most or many moral naturalists. So it's just a law like any other law. And yeah, it would be emergent of the universe, just like every other emergent property in the universe. I'm a physicalist, so I don't think there's anything else there. But I don't see how anything you said would really an objection to objective morality.
So I think if it's just a physical law, then it doesn't really inform us, right?
You broke up again.
If I say that if I say that there's a physical law, gravity, okay, and that's that just is what there is in the universe. But it doesn't tell me how I should act, behave. It doesn't inform me about whether or not my desires are good or bad. It doesn't tell me whether actions are right or wrong. And that's what we mean when we say morality. Like, what most people mean when they say morality is just to say that there is some guiding principle in my life, be it a God or a personal set of values that are based on my experiences in the world, or societal norms or things like that, that say this thing is not something that we're going to do, or this is something that we are going to do, or this thing is good, or this thing is bad. And that's what I take morals to be. So there's nothing about like a descriptive fact of the universe that is going to inform me about any of that.
Well, it seems to be your presupposition, but it seems like we can say facts describe fitness just fine. So fitness is the ability for an animal to survive. But if we look at the combination of particles, obviously none of the particles are going to tell us if an animal is going to survive. It's an inference we're making based off of different patterns in those particles. The same thing would be true of morality. It's just we see patterns in the particles and we say this combination would have one property that the other combination wouldn't. So for example, if a world did not have babies being drowned, that would be a more moral world than a world that did have babies being drowned, just like a world that didn't have a sun 6 feet away from the earth would be more conducive to life than a world that didn't. And we can call that morality. And we can describe how we should act based on what actions will lead us closer to or further away from this particular model of the world, what I call the best of all possible worlds. So we can say if our actions would lead us closer to a world that doesn't have involuntary imposition of will as my model, then it would be a moral action. And so it seems like it definitely could. I don't see why that wouldn't work as a possible guides for morality, and we couldn't base it off of the facts in the universe like any other facts. Like, that's pretty much the view of moral naturalism, that all moral facts are physical facts.
What is there about the action of, say, punching a baby in the face that is discoverable that tells me why I shouldn't punch a baby in the face?
It would be like, does that move the world closer to or further away from the best of all possible worlds? Would be the fact you can
Who's
discover.
determining what the best of all possible worlds is?
Well, the best of all possible worlds is just a description of the higher order emergent fact. It's just a label. So if it corresponds to the best of all possible worlds, like the world that doesn't have involuntary imposition of will, then it would move us further away.
Why is an involuntary imposition of will necessarily wrong?
That's my prediction about morality. So it's like saying, why is gravity gravity? Well, it's that's what the physical thing is. I don't know why gravity is gravity. That's just what we call it. So asking why is something wrong is like asking why is gravity gravity. It's just a tautology. So in my theory, I base, which is looking at moral intuition and moral progress, I describe those with a common set of principles that are what I think are the correct principles, and if my predictions are right, then that's what morality is. Just like if Einstein's prediction is right that space-time bending is gravity, that's what gravity is. Asking why is gravity space-time bending is a kind of a silly question. It's just like asking why is gravity gravity or why is morality morality. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I agree it's a silly question, right? But I don't think that the asking is the silly part, right? I think that, you say that there are these things that are discovering, you bring up these points. So if we say something like progressing morally, okay, so if we're progressing morally, that presupposes that we are in a state of moral imperfection. We are moving towards a state of moral perfection. And if what you want to say by that is you're talking about like an involuntary imposition of will, something like, okay, well, we no longer have slavery. We no longer prevent gay people from getting married. Right. Then I think most people would say something like, okay, those were impositions of will. We got rid of them. We have maybe moved closer to this state of perfection. But the belief in the idea of moral perfection is going to presuppose some kind of moral normativity.
Well, just sorry to interrupt, but that's the phenomenon we're seeing. We don't presuppose like moral progress. That's a phenomenon. So we see the past societies who used to allow slavery. So we see modern societies which don't allow slavery, and that seems like a thing. That seems like a property. Like if we see a cup fall over, it seems like the cup fell over for some reason. It's a phenomenon that we're observing. And then the explanations of that phenomenon are, one is maybe it's just something we made up, and two is it's objective. Those are two different explanations, but we don't presuppose those. It's just an explanation of the phenomenon, and then if our explanation is correct, we would then make predictions, but we're not presupposing that.
Well, I think we are presupposing it because there's nothing about those things that says that they are things that we should have done away with. If there's some discoverable fact, right? You're assuming that there is something that is discoverable, this emergent property that you believe exists, that is physical in nature, that is discoverable external of minds, that would tell us that slavery is wrong, right? And when you say wrong, what I assume that you mean is that we have some kind of obligation or duty to do or not do this thing, which is where the action guiding principle comes in. So when I say these things are strange, right? When I say it would be a strange idea for these things to exist, that's exactly what I mean. Gravity is what you get when you have this idea that merely an imposition of will that is discoverable, that there is something discoverable about slavery, that would tell us that it is wrong, is what makes the thing weird.
Well, so again,
and that's just not informative to anything, right? It doesn't get us anywhere. So it's a separate thing.
So I don't believe in oughts. Oughts are not a part of my model. It's purely descriptive. It's just describing facts. So I can describe facts in this world, and I can describe facts in another world, and I can compare the different worlds. One has different properties than the other one. So I can describe facts of a world where there's a sun next to the planet, and that would be less conducive to life. And I can describe a world where lots of people are being tortured, and that's less conducive to the freedom of will, which is what we're calling morality here. Not involuntary.
Why don't you accept oughts?
Accept what?
why don't you have oughts? Like, why don't you accept oughts in your worldview?
Because they're not part of morality. Like, oughts are simply saying if I can prove it's immoral to kill babies or whatever, then we can infer we ought not do it, but the oughts are irrelevant to the morality. Like, if I say I am 6 feet tall, then does that mean I ought to be taller or less tall? Like, no, it doesn't make a difference one way or the other. My goal in objective morality is to describe what is objectively the fact, what is or isn't moral. Whether we choose to do them or not is irrelevant. So if I wanted to be immoral, for example, then I can find out what the moral fact is. I ought not drown babies, and I can say, well, I ought to drown babies. So the oughts there are just irrelevant to the question. You just find out it is immoral to drown babies, just the fact. And then if you want to be immoral, you would then ought to drown babies. And if you want to be moral, then you ought to do morality. But the oughts are only relevant to our like hypothetical imperative of what we choose to want to do, but that's irrelevant to the objective fact of the matter.
Okay, so I'm confused. You do or do not have oughts? Because it sounds to me like you do have oughts.
No, immorality.
You're saying that we...
So morality is just factual. It is factually the case that it is immoral to kill babies for fun.
Okay, why is that the case? Why is it the case that it is wrong to kill babies? Why do we have an obligation not to kill babies?
We don't have an obligation. Obligation is post hoc. So it is
that's
factually
what it means
the case.
For something to be wrong.
No, that's not at all. Like 1 + 1 =
When we use the word wrong, we're talking about... So when we use the word right or wrong, what we're saying, we're talking about duties and obligations. When we use the word good and bad, we're talking about values.
So right? No, it just seems like you're ignorant of many models of morality, because no, they don't. Like just moral naturalism, if you go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, there's many models that don't include oughts at all. Like, so no, it seems like you've presupposed this into your worldview and are strawmanning mine with this. Like, no, you don't need that for morality.
Well, it's not necessarily that I'm saying this applies to your worldview. I'm saying that this is what people take these things to be, right? Like when if we were to, ask like most people, right, which I think is an important thing to do. Right? What do you think? What do you take morality to be? What does it mean to be moral, right? They're going to say something to the effect of, I have values, right, that tell me whether or not something is good or bad. Right. Or they're going to say something to the effect of, there are these obligations, duties that exist, right? So for instance, when we look at a trolley problem, right, when we have a classic trolley example, right, what we're supposed to do, right, is to choose the lesser of two evils. That is the right thing to do. We have a duty to do the lesser of two evils. That's what we're talking about when we say moral. There are action guiding principles.
Why are you talking about what most people interpret morality to be? Because that really has nothing to do with my position. Like, I don't care how most people interpret morality, just like Einstein didn't care how most people interpreted gravity. So why would that be relevant?
Well, so it's relevant because if I understand what you're saying, which is just basically something like I take what you're saying to be is like action X for any action X is morally wrong if X is an involuntary imposition on some agent, right? So this means that, so for instance, me asking somebody to marry me could be immoral, even if we've been together for 20 years, right?
No, that would not be the case. So involuntary impositions only apply to yourself and your property. So it wouldn't count as an involuntary imposition for someone not to do something that they didn't want to do. That would be they have the right to do that because they have ownership over themselves. So it'd only be immoral if someone forced you to do something you didn't consent to.
Well, no, I don't think so, right? Because what an imposition of will is can be understood to be a coercive act. So if I ask a woman to marry me, right? We've been together for a while, but she doesn't know that I'm going to marry her. And one day I get down on my knee and I say, will you marry me? There is societal pressure that is caked into that action, that to respond in a positive manner. There are possibly other things like the not wanting to be embarrassed in a situation. There is the surprise part of not understanding necessarily what's going on, and all of those can be coercive acts. And coercion, I think, is just synonymous with an imposition of one person's will over the other. We're just transplanting my will onto hers.
Yeah, no, none of that would be immoral in my model. Those are all subjective qualities that if you chose to be a part of the society, that you would voluntarily accept in the best of all possible worlds I'm describing. So that wouldn't be immoral at all. That's just you asking someone and they could just say no. Their choice.
Well, could they, yes, they can say no, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been coercion or force caked into that, right? Simply because you have the capacity to walk away doesn't mean that you haven't had something forced upon you. If you were to go to...
Wait, that's literally is what it means. So if you have the option of saying no, then it's literally not being forced upon you.
No, just because you have the option to be no doesn't mean it's not being forced, because, I can be in the Hitler and the Jews apartment idea, where you have the Jews hanging under your floor, and the Nazis come in and ask you, are there any Jews here? Now, I could say, yes, there are Jews here, or I could say no. But in that situation, there is coercion going on. No matter what I say, there is a will being imposed on in that situation, no matter what.
No, that in that situation,
answer I choose.
In that situation, there wouldn't be anything moral or immoral with just the words. The imposition comes, well, if you say yes, then people are going to die. So it's not about the words there. The being forced to say one thing or the other comes with these consequences that you don't have control over after the words. So the words, you're not being forced anything on the words. It's what's after the words that is being forced on you in that situation. So I don't see how that would follow. Especially in the case of just saying no to someone who's married, you just walk away. That would not impose.
So you think that it's somebody being necessarily forced to do something?
Yes.
So like putting, like the people that were taken to Australia, right, for crimes, you would say that that's immoral?
Yeah, I would say that prison is immoral. It's something we have to do pragmatically, but it would definitely be objectively immoral to force people into prison.
Why do we have to do it?
Because if we don't, there would be a greater imposition that would occur because they'd kill other people, presumably.
Yeah, but when we talk about morals, right, we're understanding them to be something that we ought or ought not do.
No, remember, there's no oughts there. No oughts in my model. So we need to do things pragmatically we need to eat food to survive, but that isn't a ought. So the fact that we need to do something for some pragmatic goal doesn't imply oughts there. It's just a pragmatic action. So we need to put people in prison in order to prevent a greater immoral imposition, but that's still an immoral imposition on somebody. It's them. So that would still be immoral. It wouldn't be perfect because there is a more moral option there. And the more moral option is like if we had potentially infinitely much power, we could just make everyone or give everyone their own personal force field or whatever, and then we wouldn't have to put people in prison anymore because you could just make yourself invincible or whatever. So the fact that we have to put people in prison is a more immoral option because there's a more moral option out there if we had enough power to do it, but we don't. And so our pragmatic limitations force us to do one immoral thing over the other, like the trolley problem. You have to kill one rather than 5.
Yeah. So what is the performative difference then in just saying, when you say morality is just an imposition of will, what is the performative difference in just saying blue is an imposition of will? Why call it morality at all?
Well, you couldn't actually decide on anything just by saying blue is morality. I don't think so. Like when we think of morality, we were thinking of some kind of ideal situation, some kind of perfection, something we're trying to use as a basis to make decisions of what to do. And blue doesn't do that. So like if I say killing is wrong,
like you're contradicting yourself there.
No, so like if I want to be moral and I want to achieve being a moral person and I say blue is moral, does painting myself blue make me moral? Like, I don't even know what that means.
But why do I want to be moral?
Well, that's just your subjective choice. Like, you may want to be immoral, you may be apathetic and not care one way or the other, but that's irrelevant to the facts of the matter. So your wanting there is irrelevant to the morality. It's just, when we're talking about morality, there are certain features that do describe this property in the world, like drowning babies, killing people. Those seem to have this property, and blue does not seem to have this property. So it would not fit to call that morality.
But again, I don't agree with that, right? I don't agree that there is anything that exists inside the statement, or the action of punching a baby that makes that action wrong. There's nothing there that I can look at and say, okay, there is a fact that exists external of my mind that I can discover about this action that would inform me that this action is wrong, such that I am therefore guided to not do this action. Where does that exist? That is something that is entirely distinct.
Well, again, you keep strawmanning my position, saying you ought not do the action. The oughts aren't a part of my model.
I'm not strawmanning your position. This is what I believe.
Okay.
Right? So I don't see where I can find this thing that you are saying exists, because it is wholly different from all the other things that you're saying it's similar to. You're saying
because I'm not saying that at all. That's what you're saying. That's your position. So your straw man doesn't exist. I'm okay with that, but that has nothing to do with my position.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. You said that moral laws are similar to physical laws.
Yes, that's right. No oughts there. I didn't say there were oughts anywhere in that.
Right. I'm not talking about an ought right now. You're saying that they're similar to physical laws. Okay, so a physical law is something that is discoverable, right?
Yes.
Newton drops the apple and he discovers gravity. I mean, basically.
Yep.
Okay. So and we can therefore know that when we drop things, they will fall to the ground. And it's not that, there's always going to hit the ground. It's not that someone couldn't reach out the hand and catch it, or we are in some weird parallel dimension where up is down, right? But we have discovered, and we have reason to believe, that that will continue to happen. But nothing about that tells us why we should behave in a certain way.
Again, why we should behave in a certain way is, again, not anything in my model. So I don't know why you keep saying that's...
Right. No, right. I understand it's not in your model. You're saying that there is absolutely nothing about what you believe to be moral that informs us of how we should behave. Okay? I get that's what you're saying. But I don't see how that is what most people, including myself, have understood to be morality, because what I take morality to be is some kind of either mind independent or mind dependent discoverable fact that is going to be action guiding, that tells us how we should behave in a given situation, such that there would be something in the universe about the action punching babies that would inform me that I shouldn't punch babies. Now, you don't have to agree with that. You are free to come up with your own definition of what the word moral means. But if what we are concerned about in the normal exercise of communication is common parlance, then no one is going to understand what you're saying when you say, this is what I mean by moral, because you're going to be held to these weird, really strange things like rocks falling down a hill and hitting you is immoral.
So again, you seem to be using an ad populum fallacy as if what people say matters at all. Like, Einstein did not care what most people thought gravity was. It just doesn't matter what most people think. They are wrong. So if I can demonstrate with some novel testable prediction that my model is right and you guys are wrong, your opinions don't matter anymore. I win, you lose. So I don't have I have absolutely nothing that I have to do to consider anything you have to say if I can demonstrate mine is right.
Okay, so but how are you going to demonstrate it, right? When Einstein said I have this hypothesis, he also had in mind a way we could test it.
Yeah, so my testable prediction is that in the future, our moral intuitions will change, where we will see rocks falling on people, the example you used, as immoral. Like, we will see that as immoral in the future. That is my prediction about how moral intuitions will change in the future.
Okay, but no one is going to disagree that moral intuitions will change.
No, but they
no
will.
One is going to disagree.
They will disagree that it will change to cause rocks falling on people to be immoral. That's the prediction. It's not just that it's going to change.
Okay, but that's a prediction, but that's not a test. That, like, you just saying as time goes by. Well, that's not what we mean when we talk about testing, right? When we talk about testing, we talk about what we can do right now. Right,
No, that's not at all what we mean by testing. So we make predictions all the time, like for the multiverse. Like, we can't test those right now. We make predictions in the future all the time that we can't do. Like, the Higgs boson was predicted like a decade before we could ever test it. Like, we don't mean we can do predictions.
Right, the Higgs boson was predicted, but they also at the same time of predicting it had an idea of what it would take in order to discover it. Right, they said, okay, this is the set of technology we have. This is how we need to this is how we need to improve the technology, and then they set about doing that.
Okay,
right?
so
I don't
let me see if I can clarify.
How, other than getting old, I can test your idea.
Yeah, so my idea is that morality is contingent on resource availability. So as societies gain more resources and they can apply more of those resources to sustain values of individuals, then once you get to a certain point of having enough resources that you can sustain everyone's values without causing involuntary imposition, then that will be the moral norm. So we can just test it by saying, once we give enough resources to a particular society, we can watch their moral intuitions change to fit this standard anywhere in the universe.
Okay, but how do you deal with the fact that people have different opposing moral systems then? Like, if everybody is moving towards this thing and we have a gross wide variety of different moral systems that are all to varying degrees opposed in such a way that it causes people to want to go to war over them to an extent, how do you know which one is how do you know that this one is the correct? You just seem to be asserting that it is the way. You're just saying, I presuppose X.
If my predictions are right, that would be good evidence that my model is right. So it's the predictions.
Okay, yes. If there are pink unicorns on Mars, then we might be able to have hippos there. Right? But that doesn't tell us anything, man. Like, I think you like. I really like.
So you asked, how do we tell which model is right? I mean, the exact same question is, how do we tell which model of the world is right? Is it round or is it flat? Well, which one makes predictions, and can we confirm those predictions? That's how we tell. I don't know. It's not really a difficult question.
Well, of course it's a difficult question, right? Because I still have, other than the passage of time, right? I have absolutely no way. Like, there is no reason for me currently. Right, like let's say, okay.
Oh yeah, no, you're totally right. Like, I can't prove objective morality today. Like, if I could do that, then objective morality would be a solved problem in physics. Like, but the fact that we have to wait until the future to confirm it isn't an argument against my model. It's just an argument that hasn't been proven yet. Like, we have to wait until the universe comes to an end to know if the big collapse model is right, or the expansion model is right, or if there's gravity is going to reverse and cause everything to collapse. We kind of just have to wait. We don't have a way to test those. They're just hypotheses. So they haven't been confirmed yet. And I agree, I can't confirm objective morality is real yet. If I could do that, then I would win a Nobel Prize. But it's.
What do you mean by objective morality would be a solved problem in physics? I don't understand what that means at all.
No, it wouldn't be a solved problem in physics. I'm saying that objective morality is not a solved problem. It's a philosophical problem in ethics. So we don't have confirmed predictions to show one answer is correct versus another answer being correct. So like in physics, there are certain models that are certain problems that are not solved problems. Like, what is the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics? And we don't know how to make predictions to show which one is correct in certain cases. And in some cases, we just have to wait. Like in the case of the universe being going to expand forever, or going to collapse, or going to bubble, we just have to wait, because one of the models is that later in the universe's lifetime, gravity is going to reverse and cause everything to collapse. We don't have any way to show that. We just have to wait. But that isn't a argument against the hypothesis that its prediction is later on that we can't test now. That doesn't matter to the hypothesis. It doesn't make it less true.
So do you think that words have generally understood meanings that are
Sure.
accepted in the lexicon. Do you
Sure.
think that your understanding of morality is what the generally understood lexicon is?
No, but I think it's the truth, so I don't really care.
Oh, okay. I mean, I get that you think it's the truth, right? But it seems to me, right, that there's no reason to call what you're talking about morality. We could call it schmorality if you want, because I don't think that what you're describing is morality. It seems to me like all you're saying is that if we impose our will on people, they might not like it. Well, okay, but I can think of reasons, good reasons, that I think most people, most moral realists, would say are moral actions to impose my will on people. So, for instance, if we say take a person who's suffering from extreme anorexia, right, and then we commit them to a hospital, right? Now they might not like the imposition, right? They might not like being locked up, right? But most people that I know to be more realists would say that the moral thing to do is to put them to impose their will such that they can continue to have a will as opposed to being dead.
Right.
And I think most people would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously wrong. So I think most people thought space-time wasn't gravity bending. They were just wrong. So in this case, it seems obvious there's a more moral option there, which is like if we had infinitely powerful, we could just get rid of the consequences of anorexia. So we could, if there were no physical consequences of anorexia, then there's no reason to put them in the hospital. And so you can save their life without imposing on their will involuntarily. And I don't think the second point is that...
You're right. You're right. That I agree with that. You are absolutely right. If there is some hypothetical world in which we can do all these things, right? If there is the Christian God, then I'm going to hell. Okay, but it doesn't tell us anything. There's nothing informative
so
there.
you argued that most moral realists would say it's moral to put this person in a hospital. Now, if there's a more moral option there, then that's not the objective morality that is correct. That is not the correct way to assess morality, because there is a more moral option that this other model did not recognize. So if there's...
I think you missed the objection there.
Your objection was that most people define it differently. I think they're wrong. Here's a prediction. Here's a way to explain why they'd be wrong. I don't know.
The objection there was when you say, like, if there is, right? And I'm saying, yeah, if there is a God that I'm going to burn in hell, if there is a more moral way to do something, then this is not the objective moral thing to do. That thing would be the objective moral thing to do, right?
Right.
But we don't assess things on if these fantastical things that are merely conceivable and almost pure fiction are things that we should possibly consider, right?
That's how thought experiments work. So thought experiments work by doing things like Einstein imagined he can travel at the speed of light. Like the fact of whether or not he can or can't do it is irrelevant. It's just a way to test the model in different situations to isolate variables in the model. That's what thought experiments do.
Of course it matters if he can or cannot do it.
What? Like, it's impossible to travel at the speed of light, but he still imagined it. I don't see why that would be... Why is that relevant that he couldn't do it?
Because he can't do it. That's the relevant thing, right? There, in the example of the anorexic person, right? All of these things are understood when we talk about objective things, and we're not talking about, like, we have direct revelatory knowledge from like a triune God under like Aquinas' definition, right? Well, when we're removing that, we're saying, okay, we don't believe in those things, right? We're talking about objective. We are not talking about epistemically certain, right? We are all operating under the understanding, you and me both here, that we could be wrong about everything. Unless you're not, unless you're saying that...
I agree, you don't need certainty for knowledge, but that wasn't anywhere in what I said.
Okay, so if you understand that you don't need certainty for knowledge when we talk about these objective things, right? We're saying these things are objective. We could be wrong about them.
Sure.
But we still call them objective, subjective, relative, things like that, right?
Yes.
Everything caked into the non-God position is that we could be wrong. So I could be wrong about the idea that the objectively moral thing to do with an anorexic person is to put them in a hospital. but I don't have any reason, any good reason, right? And that distinction is important, any good reason to do otherwise. And if I want to be a morally obligatory person, then what I should do is make sure that this person continues to possess the capacity to live out their will.
Well, again, you're conflating the do thing of what our obligations are with morality. So I just gave you a very good reason to conclude that isn't the most moral option, that there is a more moral option. Therefore, if whatever you're assessing as morality cannot accurately determine that that is the moral option, because it's not the moral option. There's another moral option there, a much more moral option. And if your model can't assess that and figure it out, then your model doesn't understand objective morality. And I don't mean objective as certainty. I mean, what is the highest standard of morality? That's what I mean by objective here. So
fiction is not a good reason.
What? Thought experiments are good evidence. Yes, thought experiments are great evidence. We use them in science all the time. Whether or not we can actually do them is irrelevant. I don't know why you think that matters.
Thought experiments are wonderful tools, right?
Yes.
And they may help us create new technologies in our minds and things like that. But when we're talking about this anorexic patient, right, we're in the here and now. So what is the objectively moral thing to do for this anorexic person? Your answer is that in the future, right, it could be the case that in some possible hypothetical world, we may possess a technology such that we can prevent her anorexia without imposing on her.
No. Again, you're conflating what we can do now, which is subjective, with what is the objective moral thing to do. Those are two different things. What is the pragmatic thing to do? What is the least immoral thing that we can do now? The subjectively moral thing to do would be to put that person in the hospital. I'm happy with that, but that's not the objective moral thing to do. The objective moral thing to do is like, imagine if we had all powerful, what could we do that would be the perfect moral thing in the situation, which would be not imposing on will. That seems to be the case. It seems to be more moral if we could do this. So this is the objective moral thing we could do. But putting them in the hospital would be the subjective moral thing we could do, what we could do with our limitations. I'm happy to grant that. But it clearly isn't the objective moral thing. That's the argument here, is that we can clearly make a distinction between those two categories. One is pragmatic, based on our subjective limitations, so it's not the objective moral thing to do. And one is, what is the absolute standard of morality that we can do in this situation?
Okay, so I have no reason to understand why I should assume that what you are talking about is in any way, shape, or form objective in any way. It's just like what I take objective to be, again, and what I think most people take objective to be. And I'm not saying, right, by the way, when I say what most people take, right, I'm not saying that Albert Einstein should have listened to like the consensus, things like that, though I think consensus is a good thing, right? Consensus helps us figure out where we're at, right? So most people in the world are moral realists, right? Most academics are moral realists, and what's left over, the majority of them are moral relativists, right? And what they mean when they say moral, right, is that there is some discoverable fact of the matter that is going to be action guiding, such that we can know how we should behave, as opposed to merely some kind of description about the physical will, right? These words, when we use these words, right, wrong, good, bad, these are prescriptive words, not descriptive words. And it seems to me that unless you kind of like I assume that you would agree with the statement that in order to work against some like immoral action, that you would have to believe it's immoral, right? So it seems to me that your view just becomes this tautology, right? Immorality is an involuntary imposition of will, because rationality with belief against immoral actions requires a belief about immorality, which just leads you right back to immorality as an imposition of will. So it seems tautological, which is just, I mean, like, what does that get us?
Well, again,
just you're just shrug and an okay?
Again, you're just not understanding the model. The model is, if I'm right about morality, here's some testable predictions we can do. That's not a tautology. There's no saying the same thing twice there. That's That's literally the hypothesis. You're saying the hypothesis defines itself as being correct. Like literally every hypothesis, you assume it's correct, predict the consequences, and then test them. So obviously, you assume your hypothesis is correct. You have to do that to predict the consequence. That's how hypothesis testing works. So that's not an objection. And again, the fact that most people think morality is this at this point in time isn't an argument against my model, because my model isn't based off of the consensus, it's based off of testable predictions. So the consensus doesn't matter here. The whole point is that, and there isn't a consensus on this, the fact that most people believe it doesn't mean that there is a consensus on what it is. And I would say that the majority of moral naturalists probably don't have the oughts in them. Many, I don't know exactly what the percentage is on that, but pretty sure it's not the case. So it seems like most of what you said is just wrong. Like the consensus doesn't say that oughts are required in morality in philosophy. In common parlance they do, but that doesn't matter. That's just an ad pop. And it's not a tautology, because you obviously assume your hypothesis is correct to make predictions in all cases. It's not tautological in science to assume your hypothesis is correct. It would only be tautological to believe it's correct without any evidence. Like if you have nothing that you could predict, or no basis in reality, and it has nothing to it at all, then yeah, sure, it's just a tautology. You're just defining it that way.
Well, I don't think you have any. Like I don't think you are predicting. Other than the natural evolution of a society.
Yeah, that they will start to see rocks falling on people as immoral. That's a pretty novel prediction. Like that's not something that is really seen. And the whole point of novel predictions is that it's something new that we don't know yet. That would be a pretty good one. Like if that would actually happen, that's a pretty good indication that I understand morality better than everybody else, because no one else predicted that. Like, right? Whatever morality is.
I would probably agree with the fact that no one has thought to predict that, an earthquake, right, which is just a natural, thing, that happens without any interference from agents, is somehow imposing some form of agency, right? Because in order to impose will, there has to be an agent. So the Earth is an agent.
No, to
universe
impose
is an agent.
on will doesn't require an agent. But again, that's irrelevant. So I made a novel prediction that no one else predicted, and if I get that right, that's pretty good. That's kind of what science is. You make some novel prediction that no one else expects based off of your model. You get it right. That's really good evidence. So saying that isn't good evidence, or that if this doesn't, or this does occur, then that isn't evidence of my model, seems to be pretty dogmatic. Like you just don't understand how predictions work.
Oh, I understand how they work, right? But I think there is just so many things that you have to hold as immoral that are just ultimately queer, right? You have to hold that most parental actions are immoral. You have to hold that school is immoral. You have to hold that marriage proposals are immoral. That
No, so those would not be
those. Prison,
no.
Is
so again, you're strawmanning my position. Like, no, surprise birthday parties would not ever be immoral in my system. Like, you can assess the morality pretty easily. Like, if you imagine you are in the best of all possible worlds, and you get to design everyone gets their own universe. You get to design your universe however you like. You would create a list of consensual things that you allow in this universe, and a list of things you don't allow in this universe. Everything on the consensual list would be consensual, so it would be not immoral. And presumably, you would put surprise birthday parties on that list. You would put marriage proposals on that list. So these would not be immoral unless specifically you didn't want them to be in your universe. Most people probably wouldn't, so these would not be immoral in my model at all. Like, but taking the pragmatic actions of like parents disciplining you, like obviously there is again a more moral option there. The only reason parents need to discipline children is because it's pragmatic. You need to stop them from running into the street because they're going to get hit by a car. But again, there's a more moral option there. If you could just make the kids ethereal so they would just not get hit by the car, you don't need to stop them from running into the street anymore.
I'm sorry, if we could make the kid ethereal?
Yeah, like a ghost, like so not if the car wouldn't physically hit it.
I mean, come on, man. Did you just hear the words that came out of your mouth? And you think that's what morality is?
Yeah,
making kids ghosts so they don't like get hit by oncoming traffic.
Yeah, if there's a way to do something without causing involuntary imposition of will, that is the more moral thing to do. Yes, that would be an example I thought of to accomplish this.
Why should I believe any of this?
Because I make testable predictions, and if my testable predictions are correct, that's good evidence that I understand the topic better than you.
Okay, but you can't test your predictions in any capacity where I will be able to see those things come true. In any capacity. I'm 30 years old. I am not going to live to the point where we can turn children into ghosts. I am not going to live to the point where we have transporters that can just
I don't know why you think this is a valid objection. Like, the fact that you aren't going to live to the end of the universe means we won't be able to test the grand collapse model, and we won't be able to demonstrate it to you.
Because I will never have any capacity, right? I will never have any capacity, nor will you, by the way.
Yes, but again, that doesn't make a difference. Whether or not we can test it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. If someone else verifies it after I'm dead many years from now, that would still be evidence for my hypothesis. Whether or not you can verify
but
it.
I have I have no reason to believe it.
Right, no, so I'm granting I cannot confirm and solve objective morality today, or I would have already won a Nobel Prize. So yes, I grant to you I cannot verify the predictions yet, but if my predictions...
When we talk about being rational, right, when we talk about people that are acting rational, we're talking about people that are acting in accordance with their desires and that they believe that they are acting in accordance with their desires, right? Do you accept that?
I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
Okay, so do you understand? Do you accept that acting rational is acting in accordance with desires?
I usually think being rational is usually acting in accordance with some set of propositions, not necessarily values. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It seems to me that if you wanted to be, if you want to hold your position rationally, right, that there would have to be some reason to believe it, right? Well, let me rephrase that. Maybe you don't need to be rational in order to hold your belief, but in order for me to hold your position, right, in order for me to say it is rational, that we have good reason to believe TJump's position, then I'm going to have some reason to believe it. And simply stating that it is possible, it is a possibility that in the future I may be proved right, is not any reason. There's no rational reason. There's no good reason.
Right. So I've already granted this position like 10 times. I can't show demonstrable empirical evidence of morality today. Like, obviously I can't do that, or I already would have won a Nobel Prize. Like, so I'm saying, here's my hypothesis. Here's the reason I hold that hypothesis. If it seems rational to you and that we may come to that conclusion in the future, then it would be good for you to adopt it as a hypothesis. Obviously, I'm not saying I can prove it to be correct. Otherwise, I would have won a Nobel Prize. So, like, if you're asking a physicist, why should we believe in the grand collapse model? He's just going to say, well, that's my prediction based off the evidence. That's it. That's as good as it gets. Like, it's just a hypothesis right now. I'm not claiming that I can prove it yet.
What we can conclude here is if we were to, like, syllogize your position, right? We were to say action X is morally wrong, which is a prescriptive.
No, again,
if
so that's your
is an involuntary imposition on A for some agent, right? Now the is there, right, is the is of identity. Do you agree with that?
The is of identity is what, I don't know what you mean by, like, other kinds of ises. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there's the is of identity and there's the is of predication. Right, and if you're saying that is the is of predication, then you're going to have to justify it.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're saying there, so it's just not relevant to my model.
Well, of course it's relevant to your model.
No, you just...
Right, you understand what an identity relationship is, right?
I have no idea what you're saying there, so you'd have to explain how this is in any way relevant to anything I said.
Because if you were saying action X is morally wrong, right, and that is the is of identity, then you're just not saying anything.
So again, none of that, you have to explain how any of that is in any way relevant to anything I said. So my position is, if we want to syllogize it, is any involuntary imposition of wrong is immoral, or just to say, I don't want to put it into a syllogism, I'm too lazy for that. And the reason to believe it was that it makes testable predictions. If I'm right about the predictions, that's a good reason to believe it, that my model is correct. Obviously, we can't do it yet. I'm happy to grant that. But here is my interpretation of the evidence. This is the conclusion it leads to. Here's a prediction. That's essentially exactly how science does. And so complaining that this is not proven yet isn't really an objection. Like, I haven't claimed it is proven yet.
So I am going to say, right, that the idea that this thing that you're talking about, like this discoverable fact, does not exist anywhere it is not a discoverable thing, right? It is wholly different from the things that you are attempting to compare it to, right? You are attempting to compare this thing to properties, particular events, right, that the natural physical world contains and that science investigates, right? I'm not strawmanning.
Yes, that's
correct.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Those things, they don't exist. There's no reason to believe they exist because of what is baked into the word moral. Okay. So
you're saying your objection to my model of morality is that you presuppose something different about morality. Like that's, I don't care. Like moral naturalism. So moral naturalism. Moral naturalism is 4 propositions. Moral realism. There are objective, mind, independent moral facts. Metaphysical naturalism, moral facts are natural facts. Epistemic naturalism, we know moral claims are true in the same way we know any claims about the natural sciences. And analytic naturalism, our moral claims are synonymous with certain highly complex claims about the natural sciences. That's just the definition of moral naturalism in philosophy, just read off the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. If you're just rejecting the entire field of moral naturalism because you presuppose a different definition, like, I'm sorry, but I don't care what your definition is. I've got testable predictions. Your opinion on the topic
but presupposing you don't have testable predictions.
Yes, I do. Testable predictions means a thing we can observe in the future or some experiment that we can see a result. And if we get that result right, that's a testable prediction. So I do, by definition. Like we can do an experiment and we can see if we give a society enough sufficient resources to be able to meet my standard, we can watch their moral intuition change in accordance with that situation to fit this model. Anywhere in the universe, all species, every intellectual species will accomplish this if they have intellectual sufficiency. We do have, that is a testable prediction. Give enough intelligence and resources to a society, they will devolve this particular intuition of morality. That is a testable prediction. I don't know why you think it's not. Whether or not we can test it now, it doesn't matter to testable prediction. Testable prediction doesn't mean test it now.
My issue here, the reason I keep bringing these things up, right, is because it seems to me that what you are ultimately saying is that these things are just like brute facts, right? But
what's a brute fact?
We don't. Something that is true of the gravity is just a brute fact of nature. Okay?
I don't think I would agree with that.
Well, I don't see why you wouldn't, since you didn't seem to know what the term meant.
Well, a brute fact is something true that has no explanation. Like gravity does have an explanation. It's curvature of space-time. Like why does gravity have a particular constant is probably going to be determined by the whatever quantum field gravity emerges from, emergent space-time. None of those are brute facts. Like a brute fact is just a thing that exists with no explanation. Like I think reality is a brute fact, but the properties of reality, like gravity or morality, would not be. They're just emergent properties, so they're not brute facts.
So it seems to me that we just have like a fundamental disagreement over what the word morality means, and I think you have a disagreement with the majority of people over what the word morality means. I don't think your position tells us anything, right? Like it seems to me your position just boils down to people do things people don't like. Okay. Yeah, people do things people don't like. So what? All right. So what?
So if I'm right,
what are we supposed to do about it? All right. Where's the prediction that says like, what are we supposed to do about it?
Well, if you want to be moral, what you can do about it is not do things.
Why would I want to be moral?
That's your subjective choice. Like, I don't care why you would want to be moral or want to be immoral. Your personal preferences has nothing to do with the objective fact of the matter of whether or not something is moral. Whether you want to be tall or short makes no difference to whether you are tall or short. So asking why you would want to be, I don't care. I care about the objective fact of the matter, not your personal opinion on what you want to do.
It becomes an uninformative thing, which is why I said, why not just call it blue? Because I can ask the same thing. Why should I want or want not to be blue? There's nothing informative about it. Morality is supposed to be informative. It's supposed to guide us. This action is wrong,
Again,
so
that's
we
that's
probably
your
shouldn't do
presupposition.
wrong things.
Again, you keep saying,
right? And you want to say we have pragmatic reasons not to do these things.
What?
Okay, so then morality is irrelevant to anything. It's irrelevant to anything, and the only thing that matters is the pragmatism. And there's no reason to move towards a more morally perfect world because it doesn't inform us of anything. If the world is completely morally perfect, so what? That doesn't tell me why I shouldn't impose my will on other people.
So again, you keep saying you have a different definition of morality. No one in moral naturalism cares what your definition is. So I don't know why you think it's relevant that you have a different definition. Like, no one cares what you think morality should be. We care about what reality thinks morality is. So the fact that you think it needs to entail some kind of motivation factor to it to tell us what to do is, you're wrong. I mean, that's all I need to say, and I've debunked your entire position. Like, you presuppose your definition, your presupposed definition is wrong. We can move on now. Like, if you just want to...
Well, I don't know what you think you've debunked, right? All I have said about my position, right? And my position is that this thing that you think exists does not exist, that it is wholly different from the things that you want to compare it to. Moral truths are not natural, scientifically discoverable
does
facts.
fitness
they are
exist?
Different. They are a different category of things.
Let's just address that. So does fitness exist?
Yeah, fitness exists. Morals are fitness.
Obviously. So fitness is what? It describes something. It's a word we use to describe some phenomenon, right?
Sure.
So morality,
or some state of being,
is a word we use to describe some phenomenon, just like fitness. Like, I don't see.
No.
Why not?
Because it's not.
We're not great argument. Because it's not. Because you like to use it in a way. Like, I don't care how you like to use it.
Well, of course you do.
What?
Of course you do. Right? You just asked me a question. Right? Is this the case? No, it's not the case. It's not the case that morals are merely describing some phenomenon. No, it's not. Morals are prescriptive.
No. So again, if you just want to disagree with moral naturalism, like, okay, but we don't care about your opinion on the matter, and we make predictions. So your opinion about your presupposed definition, we don't care about. So that isn't an argument against our position at all. It doesn't work.
Well, of course it works, because all you're doing is continuing to add more and more and more and more and more ontological commitments onto things that don't need those ontological commitments.
No, I never said that anywhere in my argument, so okay, that doesn't work.
No, I didn't say you said it. It's the entailment of your argument. If what you are saying is true, right, then your judgments are true by the existence of these objectively existing and necessarily motivating things.
No, again, so
right?
Necessarily motivating is not a requirement of morality. There's actually a term for that. I forget what it was. Something like judgment internalism. Yeah, judgment internalism and judgment externalism. The motivation is not a requirement in morality. Like, that's not a thing that philosophers accept. You do not need judgment internalism to be true for morality to be true. It's just not the case. You do not need it to be motivating. It's not required.
Okay, well, I'm just going to disagree with that, right? And that's just going to be like, I mean, that's just what it's going to come down to, right?
Sure.
I understand, right, what these people to be saying is that there are necessarily motivating entities to these things in order for something to be objective. And we have no reason to believe in the existence of metaphysically queer entities that, and metaphysically queer entities being objectively existing and necessarily motivating entities.
Okay, so you presuppose judgment.
I take you to be a moral realist, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I group you in with all of those other moral realists that believe that there is some mind-independent fact of the matter about the universe that is discoverable, right?
Yes.
That is discoverable. You want to say that tells us absolutely nothing other than the state of this thing.
So again, you just seem to you presuppose judgment internalism. You could just go to the Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy of Moral Naturalism, just Google judgment internalism, and you presuppose that position, and therefore you think mine is wrong. Like, no, That's just not how arguments work. You can't presuppose your interpretation, therefore say others is wrong. It's not actual evidence. And you presuppose that morality isn't a description of natural facts. Again, just moral naturalism, the very first set of describing what it is we know moral claims are true in the same way we know the claims are true about the natural sciences and are synonymous with highly complex natural sciences. That's literally just the definition of moral naturalism. This is a well-accepted position in philosophy. Saying that, no, it can't be that way because you presuppose something differently isn't an argument. That doesn't actually work.
Okay, show me where this thing resides.
Where does fitness reside?
Well, I would assume a biological creature's fitness resides internally in and of itself.
So fitness is a relationship between some property of the features that construct it and its relationship to the environment. So it's a higher order emergent property. So it's not actually in the creature. So that's kind of the thing. Morality is also a higher order emergent property. It describes relationships between things. It isn't like a particular particle. That's what higher order emergent property means. So I don't know exactly how to answer your question there, because I wouldn't say that fitness exists in any particular location. It's a relationship between the features of an organism and the features of the environments in which it can particularly live.
Okay, so you have really just no response other than to say, I just believe it is the case that these things exist. Okay. What is your response to the different views on morals, as many as there are, other than I just think mine's right?
I make testable predictions. If mine are right, then I have a reason to believe mine over all others. That's the testable predictions thing.
You don't think any other moral systems make testable predictions?
I don't know of any, but if they do, that's cool. And if they make different ones, that would be great evidence of them. That would be phenomenal. So if they make different testable predictions and they're right,
Christianity's moral systems make all kind of moral predictions. So do Islam's. Make all kinds of predictions,
sure.
And they say that they have evidence that those things exist.
Sure. If we died and we met God after heaven, that would be great evidence. Sure. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that dying and meeting God is about as assurable as the evidence of you thinking that one day we will show how rocks hitting us in the head are immoral. But it seems to me that with moral disagreements, the best explanation is that moral codes, right? And I assume you do agree that there are moral codes, merely reflect different ways of life, different the environments that life has found itself in have produced different sets of morals. And the idea that somehow, like, I assume you would say something to the effect of female genital mutilation is immoral, right? I would assume so, correct?
Sure.
Yeah. But this group of people over here says, no, it's not. It's the most moral thing we could possibly do. And you're saying, well, there's something discoverable, right?
Yes. Correct.
Okay. And so you're going to say that the people that that say that this is wrong have already discovered that fact.
No.
So
what?
Well,
no.
they're saying we know this thing is immoral. And they're saying, look, the thing cries, right? And what are they talking about? They're talking about all these evolutionary things that we have.
So I've never said they've already discovered this. Like, again, my testable prediction has not been discovered yet, so I don't know why you think I would say.
Well, it seems to me that I don't see why you would argue otherwise. It seems to me that people are saying we know this to be the fact.
I still have no idea what you think. What other people say is relevant to my model. I don't know why you keep bringing up what their position is. Like, I don't think they've discovered objective morality. They may think they've discovered objective morality, and they can think that they're just wrong as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know why you keep bringing up what they think, like why what they think isn't really relevant to other models.
I think I keep bringing it up just to hammer home the idea that you are just equivocating on what we mean when we say morals. I think I keep bringing it up to make sure that you understand that what you are actually saying is your position is schmoral, not moral. And you are free to say all day long that you have schmorals.
So I've already
But you
debunked that
haven't-
argument like entirely. Like
No, you haven't
no,
debunked
I've
anything.
I've entirely debunked that argument. Like the fact that other people
stating
wait.
that you have this
No, that's not what I'm
thing
saying
that
here.
you
So
think can happen doesn't debunk anything.
So I've already debunked that argument. That's an ad populum fallacy. We know that isn't a valid argument. It does not follow that my model is wrong because most people like to use it in some other way. That isn't evidence. So keep you saying that just shows you're
saying that your model is wrong because most people think this. I'm saying that you are not talking about what they're talking about.
Again, that
your
doesn't matter. That's an ad populum
have...
fallacy. So your ad populum fallacy isn't
not.
argument. So try to put it in a syllogism form. I'm not talking about what they're talking about. Therefore, what?
I am not saying that your world, that your thing here doesn't make predictions, right? I'm saying it's not addressing the thing that we're talking about.
No. So
I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong.
Again, so that isn't a valid argument.
It's wrong.
Again, I understand you're saying that's not a valid argument. So saying that there is no real morality because what you are talking about morality doesn't exist. Like I don't care what you're talking about.
I'm not saying that there's no. That's not what I'm saying either.
Okay.
Right. Whether or not there is real morality or not, right, is in the realm of, say, my error theory versus some moral relativists or some moral realist, right? But you're not one of those people. You're talking about something else, and you're making predictions about something else, and you're bootstrapping your something else into what we're talking about.
No, again, so that's you presupposing your definition, which is just you making shit up, and then assuming that my definition is wrong, which is, again, just you making shit up. That's not a valid argument. That's just an ad populum fallacy. So I could make the exact same argument for Einstein and say, well, when we talk about gravity, we're not talking about space-time bending, and you're talking about space-time bending. Therefore, you're not talking about what we're talking about, which is just irrelevant. Like, I'm talking about reality. So if you're just making shit up, like, okay, you're wrong.
Okay, but I don't see what that gets you. Just telling me that I'm wrong, I don't see what that gets you.
It gets you just about as much as you saying that you're right by assuming that what you're talking about is the correct definition of morality. When you want to know if something's true, it needs to correspond to reality, not just what you're talking about. So what you're talking about doesn't matter at all. It's irrelevant to the topic. Morality is determined by reality, not by you.
Yeah, well, no, you're right. It's not determined by me, right? And you know,
what is it determined by? If there is morality, what does determine it?
Well, I don't think there is morality.
Well, no. So this is hypothetical. Like you granted the possibility that there could be a God, and that would determine it. What does determine objective morality, if it potentially existed?
I have no idea.
Well, just reality, right? Like it would be, if there was objective morality, then it would be a part of reality, correct? That would just reality determines if it is or is not the case, right?
Sure. If there was this thing, morality, that was objective, there would be some discoverable fact about the universe that we live in, such that we can know that performing an action is wrong. And what we mean by wrong,
that part's where you need to stop. That part you don't. That's the part where you're wrong. What you mean by it doesn't matter to reality. No, reality does not care what you mean by it. The only determining factor is reality, not what you mean by it. Your interpretation.
So now you're not only equivocating on what the word morality means. Now you're equivocating on bad and good, right and wrong.
What? No. I'm saying that, again, as you admitted, whether something is true is determined by reality, not by you. So if you're incorporating what makes something true, the truth maker is contingent on how you are using the word, you're wrong. Like, no, the truth condition is about what's true in reality, not how you're using the word. And so when you're combining those two factors, you've made a mistake. You have made an error in judgment, which I can just demonstrate. Like, no, if your truth condition is required on how you use the word, then you're not determining truth based off of reality. You're determining it based off of how you use the word, which is not how to determine truth.
I'm not exactly 100% sure what you say. Like, you keep saying, I mean, this is what I think this entire debate so far has boiled down to, right? I say a word. I am using, right, the commonly understood definition, right, of that word, Right? We understand that definitions are verbal utterances that society as a whole has agreed on in order to be able to have a conversation about certain things, right? And we have rules of inference that allow us to make sure that we're not talking past each other, like the law of contradiction, non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, and the law of identity, right? Now, there's nothing about those laws that affect the material world, right? But we have them in order to have this conversation, right? And so what all you've done so far is just violate the lexicon, right? Right or wrong is in the lexicon understood to be talking about duties and obligations. Good and bad is understood to be talking about values and beliefs. Like I have a desire to be hydrated, right? So what I ought to do is drink water every time I am dehydrated, right? To satiate my desire, my value to not be hydrated, right? As opposed to the trolley problem, right? Where I have an obligation, I have a duty to pull the lever to kill the one person instead of the 5 people, right? And to pull the lever to kill the one person is the right thing to do. And if you were to say no, that's not what we mean, then I don't know what you're talking about anymore.
Right. So I can just that's a good closing statement. I'll do mine too. Like, yeah. So if essentially your only argument is that you use the word differently, therefore my word is wrong, which isn't a valid argument. Like, the determining factor of objective morality, moral realism, is if there is a feature in the world that corresponds to morality, not whether how you use the word. Like, no one cares about how you use the word. And as I've demonstrated, the way I'm using the words is common parlance in moral philosophy. So whether or not you agree with them, like, I mean, I don't care. Like, it's not like I'm just making up an arbitrary definition like morality is blue. I'm using common terms that are well understood in philosophy and moral naturalism. I even gave you the sources on the Stanford Encyclopedia where you could look these up. This is not just me making up my own lexicon. This is a genuine hypothesis of morality in philosophy. So your interpretation of how you think the word should be used isn't relevant to the question of whether or not moral realism, whether it's a part of reality, because that's about reality, not how you use the words. And that was essentially your entire argument. So it wasn't really productive in that way.
All righty. Well, you guys went to closing statements before I could even say, "Hey, let's go to closing statements." That's awesome. I love it when my debaters actually do things themselves and I don't have to do work. Anyway, we have several questions that have popped up in the debate chat. If you guys have some time, I'd like to go over them with you.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right. Spaz asks, I'd like to ask what the difference between a world where immorality is involuntary imposition of will and a world where that isn't the case. Is there any way to tell the difference in principle?
Well, I'd say the same thing. Like, if you tried to tell the difference between 2 different animals, one that has more fitness or less fitness, like, how would you tell the difference? Well, it's really just a comparison. Like, if you put this animal in this set of worlds, it's going to survive in a more or a higher number than the other ones. And the same thing would be true of morality. Like, if you would assess, if we put a person in this number of worlds, then their will would be less imposed on in more of a number of them or whatever, or more or less ways. That would be the way to tell. Same way as fitness.
All right. Next one is from Tataris. I'd like to ask TJump if by morality you mean something different to what anyone else is saying. How is it BattleJew is committing an ad populum fallacy rather than you committing a fallacy of equivocation?
Because, as I said, these are well understood topics in moral philosophy. I'm not like just making up terms and calling morality blue. This is a actual hypothesis in the philosophy of morality. It's not analogous to me just making up my own language, because I'm stealing the language of actual philosophers who have taken all these positions, and I've presented you the sources to actually verify that for yourself, if you're interested.
All righty. Next one is by Freeze Peach. If TJump's claim is that involuntary imposition of will is the objective meaning of the term immoral, what prevents someone from using unjustified harm as the objective meaning? What makes his view more accurate?
Well, the objective is whether or not it's true independent of opinion, so it would have to be correspond to something in reality. Like, so if there's some law that instantiates that definition, they would be right and I'd be wrong, and if there's some feature of reality that shows that I'm right, then I'd be right and they'd be wrong. So it's whether or not it corresponds to reality is the determining factor in who is correct.
Alrighty, and next one is again by Free Speech. Is TJump's position that we can imagine a best of all possible worlds where I imagine what acts would be consented to, i.e. surprise parties, a version of John Rawls' original position veil of ignorance argument?
And I'd be closer to Robert Nozick's free traversal of society model, but John Rawls is a pragmatic model saying we should design a society that would be fair no matter where you would be placed in society. Like in my model, everybody's placed in the exact same position of having their own universe that they can define however they want. And so it would definitely meet Rawls's criteria. But if you're trying to compare my model to someone else's model, it would be closer to Robert Nozick's, I think.
All right, Free Speech again. This is the last one. Would TJump say the statement, "Don't do immoral things," a moral fact?
No, I'd say that's a preference. So I'd say I agree with Kant's hypothetical versus categorical imperative distinction. So I'd say that if something is immoral, it's a fact about reality, not about your position on it. So you can choose, you can have an ought to do an immoral thing. Like, for example, if I want to be immoral, then I ought to do immoral things. The ought there doesn't then make the immoral things moral because it has an ought. Like the ought is determined by your preference, not the feature of reality. So no, the fact that you ought to do something is irrelevant to the morality. It's simply a post hoc interjection about what you think you should do to accomplish your personal goals. It's a hypothetical imperative, not a categorical one.
Okay, Acer is next, and he has a long one. Is TJump able to walk through one of his testable predictions through to completion, to test why something is moral? From formulation to testing to replication to interpolation of the results, just because a hypothesis can help us make testable predictions doesn't mean there will be support for that hypothesis. So I believe that he's analyzing, God, I can't spell, his worldview to a scientific hypothesis fallacy.
I'm not sure what he means there. So yes, I could say that if we give a society a sufficient number of resources and they have a sufficient intelligence, then their intuitions will evolve in such a way that it will prioritize involuntary imposition of will because of it's a feature of the world, like fitness. Like if we give enough resources to a animal, essentially, it will evolve the ability to survive in more environments or whatever. So it's just a observable phenomenon like evolution, that if you have these conditions, it'll change us in this particular way, like evolution. So evolution is a thing, it's an observable thing. Our changes in intuitions are an observable thing, and they change in a particular direction, and that directionality is what I'm referring to as morality. So that would be the hypothesis and how to test it and how to verify it. So yes.
TJump, they just love asking you questions. Crispy asks, ask if TJump has heard of projectivism and quasi-realism. If so, what does he think of them?
I have heard of quasi-realism. I did study that a while ago. I have not heard of projectivism. I don't really have an opinion on them much. Like, just different interpretations. Like, same as error theory or non-cognitivism. Like, okay. Like, I don't really have an opinion on them, I don't think.
The next one's a really fiery one. Shisha says, is the proposition TJump shouldn't rape a baby true or false according to your objective morality?
That would not be a moral statement. It would be a descriptive statement. So it would be like saying that it is objectively immoral to rape a baby would be a true moral statement. The should there would just be a preference-based thing. The should is irrelevant to the question. So it would be objectively, it would be an objective moral fact to say raping a baby is wrong. TJump should not rape a baby. That would be an objective moral fact. Yes, a true objective moral fact.
Okay, that looks like it's the end of the questions.
Cool.
Well, in that case, wait a minute. Holy cow. Missed asks at the last second. Can we deem something immoral to be taking your own and someone else's desires at the same? Did I just read that wrong? Can we deem something immoral to be taking your own and someone else's desires at the same time, which would be contradictory? So would it be immoral?
I'm not sure what that means.
He gave an example of, again, rape. Sorry. Your desire is that you want to rape this woman. The person you want to rape has the desire that they want to be not raped.
Oh,
you
yeah.
Consider both desires at the same time. Would it be deemed immoral?
No, so your voluntary imposition of will only applies to yourself and your universe. So you don't get to will that you own someone else or that you force someone else to do something without their consent. Obviously, that would be immoral. So your will only applies to yourself and your property or your universe, not anybody else. So it would not be a contradiction. It would not be immoral for someone else not to abide by your will. It would only be immoral if someone forced you to do something without your consent, not whether or not they just didn't consent to doing something. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing immoral with that.
Okay, CEP says, are you really comparable to Einstein with morality? This was your comparison. Should anyone take you seriously without thought, experiment, or proof in such hand?
No, I'm not comparable to Einstein. The argument was comparable to Einstein. So his argument was that, well, many people think of things differently, and as if that was a valid argument. And so my example of why that's not a valid argument is like Einstein. It wasn't a comparison to me. It was a demonstration of that argument is an ad populum, which doesn't actually work.
And from SEP for BattleJew, you cited the law of identity in your closing statement. Would you please tell us what you take that to be?
Yeah, I take the law of identity to be a law of thought, of knowledge, right? That we use as an inference for communication, such that when I say the word apple, people that speak the English language know what I mean. And so when I say the word apple, it is commonly understood to be a fruit that, comes in either, typically red, yellow, or green. That way we, don't equivocate with each other. So we can have a conversation. Even, and then of course that's going to go across languages, right? So if I say, how are you? Versus I say, Unhimanakinis, they mean the same thing. So if that's what you're asking, that's what I take it to be.
Okay, there was one more. Darn it, stop doing that. Beethoven asked, why is it a moral fact based on what? And he said, in reference to the previous question about child rape being wrong. So that's probably for TJump.
What? What was the question?
Asked why is it a moral fact based on what? And he said, in reference to the previous question about child rape being wrong.
It corresponds to the moral property. That would be why it's a moral fact. There's like, why is the ability to survive in more environments a property of a more fit animal? Like, it corresponds to the properties of in reality that correspond to what we were saying there. So that's what makes it more moral, is that it's more moral because it corresponds to the moral fact. I don't know how else to answer that.
Okay, and that's it for the questions. So, alrighty, thank you guys very much for coming over. TJump, thank you for visiting again. We loved having you over here. And so at that point, we'll wrap it up.
Appreciate the conversation. I only got called ignorant once, so
Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, it was pleasant talking with you. You're definitely no Darth Dawkins. Appreciate it.
I love this channel. You guys have a great night.
You got one more question.
One more question?
Yeah. Satan said, how does his view predict anything? A definition doesn't make any kind of empirical predictions.
Right. So we look at the phenomenon of moral intuition and moral progress. I try to make a principle that describes the pattern in that phenomenon, and then I take that pattern and put it to its extreme and see, well, if this pattern continues over X amount of time, or when we get X amount of resources, this is what it will be. So the definition is just a principle I'm using to describe the phenomenon, or what the principle I see, the pattern I see in the phenomenon. The definition doesn't make a prediction. It's the definition plus the pattern that then leads to a prediction.
Did you just really call Satan Satan?
Me?
I wasn't gonna say the actual word, but it's spelled. It's pronounced both ways. Anyway, we're gonna call it a night. So, you guys have a great night. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. See you.